This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jonathan Savage, and in the early hours of Saturday, the 20th of November, these are our main stories. In a case that has divided America, a teenager who shot 2 people dead and injured another during racial justice protests has been found not guilty of murder. We'll get the first reactions. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, admits his security forces have beaten up protesters in prison. Also in this podcast, we hear from Africa's last absolute monarchy, Eswatini, where pro-democracy protests turned deadly.
We see these things, we see blood, we see relatives crying, and it becomes emotional because you know this can stop, but no one is trying to stop it.
And we look at the popularity of spiritual guides in Pakistan. There was never any question whether Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 men and injured a third in Kenosha, Wisconsin in August 2020. Aged just 17 and too young to legally own the military-style weapon he used, he was charged with the murders of Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum. Prosecutors said he had gone out looking for trouble. The defence said Kyle Rittenhouse feared for his life. The verdict, not guilty of murder. Not guilty, indeed, of any of the 5 charges he faced. Our correspondent Nomia Iqbal reports from Kenosha.
The defendant will rise and face the jury and hearken to its verdicts.
A dangerous vigilante or someone acting in self-defence. After 26 hours, the jury decided Kyle Rittenhouse's fate.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
The 12 men and women of the jury accepted the teenager's claim he killed out of fear for his safety.
Somehow, some way, those 12 jurors again found that he was innocent.
Outside court, the political divisions this case has caused were clear.
If you attack me, I have the right to defend myself. That's what Kyle was on trial for, and that's what Kyle is now found acquitted of. Okay, so you're telling me if 2 guys come up to you and accost you, you can't defend yourself? That's what was on trial today.
Judicial bias that was exhibited in this case is repugnant.
Yes, sir.
There is no way
Yes,
in
sir.
a law and a land of law where a person can shoot 3 people, kill 2 of them, and be acquitted. There's just no way.
The shooting happened against the backdrop of nationwide protests over racism and police brutality following the murder of George Floyd. In Kenosha, another black man named Jacob Blake had been shot by a white police officer. And on the 3rd night of riots here, Kyle Rittenhouse entered the city. He said he came to provide security.
I work in that business.
That same day, Joseph Rosenbaum had been released from hospital. Hours later, their paths crossed at this crucial spot, a used car dealership. It's next to a main road and opposite a medical centre. It's about a 6-minute walk from the courthouse. Video footage shows Joseph Rosenbaum running after Kyle Rittenhouse into the car park. Moments later, he was shot and killed by the teenager. Rittenhouse then killed another man who chased after him, thinking he was an active shooter. A 3rd man survived. Police later arrested the teenager and charged him with murder.
Someone injured straight ahead?
At his trial, there were tears,
That's what I run.
challenges,
You're telling us that you felt like you were about to die, right?
Yes.
But when you point the gun at someone else, that's going to make them feel like they're about to die, right? That's what you wanted him to feel.
No.
shouting by the judge,
Pardon me?
That was before the
Don't
defense
get
testimony.
brazen with me.
and a controversial defence by Rittenhouse's team in regards to the shooting of Jacob Blake.
Other people in this community have shot somebody 7 times, and it's been found to be okay. And my client did it 4 times in 3/4 of a second to protect his life from Mr. Rosenbaum. I'm sorry, but that's what happened.
This not guilty verdict is seen as a referendum on an issue that polarizes Americans beyond Kenosha, and that is the issue of gun ownership. For many conservative groups, Kyle Rittenhouse is now seen as a hero, but for many liberal groups, he is the face of a gun culture out of control, and they're worried by being cleared of the charges what it might mean now for future protests. Can Americans turn up with a gun but not face any consequences?
Nomia Iqbal in Kenosha. And just before we recorded this podcast, Nomia gave us the latest from outside the courthouse.
Well, right now things are calm. There are still people holding signs and showing exactly what they feel. It's so politically divisive. Every now and again, people drive past in their cars, tooting their horns, saying, "Free Kyle," and "We love the 25th Amendment," in reference to the right to bear arms. The National Guard is on standby here in case there is any violence, because of course Kenosha doesn't want a repeat of that very violence that we saw last year, which ultimately led to the deadly encounter involving Kyle Rittenhouse. And he's also spoken tonight. He has said he's remorseful and he just wants to get on with his life. You know, this is a case that pulled together so many explosive issues in America: so the right to own guns, protests, racial injustice. There are some civil rights activists who have said that if Rittenhouse had been a black teenager who had shot at 3 white men that night, police would have behaved very differently. So you've got that element. But then also the family of one of the men that Kyle Rittenhouse shot dead that night, Anthony Huber, have said that this now sends this very dangerous message that armed civilians can show up in any town and justify shooting people. For many pro-gun groups, this is a victory. And so that divide, it's just going to get deeper. And I think Kyle Rittenhouse has become the face of quite a few movements in this country now.
Nomia Iqbal. Now, it's a statement of the obvious that this has been a highly charged case and politically divisive across America. President Biden has appealed for everyone to express their views peacefully and says the verdict must be respected. Speaking after the verdict, defence lawyer Mark Richards said there was relief for Kyle Rittenhouse and his team.
Say that we were relieved would be a gross misunderstatement. And Kyle is not here. He's on his way home. He wants to get on with his life. He has a huge sense of relief for what the jury did to him today. He wishes none of this would have ever happened. But as he said when he testified, he did not start this.
Well, let's hear an alternative reaction to that non-guilty verdict from a member of Kenosha City Council, Anthony Kennedy. He spoke to the BBC's Chris Morris.
Disappointed, but not shocked. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised, and I was hoping I was wrong. I was hoping this is a situation where my cynicism was just going to be wrong, but I take no joy in being right.
And what does it tell us about, in your view, the U.S. justice system?
I'm not willing to indict the U.S. justice system over this particular verdict. He had a day in court. Whether that worked the way I thought it should, he had a day in court. He had what his victims didn't have. And there's going to be a lot of victim shaming here. You're going to hear some things about the 2 people who died. And whatever they had in their past, they did not get to face a trial for that. They were executed on the streets of my town. So I'm not willing to really yet indict the entire justice system. I'm trying to keep it focused on this person who came to our town carrying an illegal weapon and became judge and jury for 2 people and maybe a third.
And Jacob Blake's uncle told the BBC on the court steps that he believes if Kyle Rittenhouse had been a black teenager, the police would have shot him dead. Do you agree with that?
I will tell you that I have plenty of minority friends in this community who conceal carry, and they would not open carry in that kind of situation because we don't get afforded the same opportunities that these alt-right militia, property protectors, whatever you want to call them.
And you're talking about, just to be clear for an audience outside the United States, you're talking about open carrying of assault weapons.
Correct. So I have friends who conceal carry because we don't get afforded that same opportunity to open carry. Had Anthony been on that street and shot 2 people, Anthony would have been dead.
So what happens now? I mean, I know the National Guard's been sent to Kenosha. Are you worried that this is going to spiral?
I'm a black man in America, dude. This is not the thing that's going to set me over the edge. Adversity and disappointment is currency for black people in America. But having said that, we've tried to build some capacity into this community in the past year. And there's some very dedicated people who have taken ownership of Kenosha and the activism community. And we've tried our best to build some capacity in that. And I am trusting that we have some circuit breakers in place, metaphorically speaking. There will be people who will come to this town and be angry, and I can't stop them from being angry. There'll be some people who come to this town who will be self-righteous in this verdict. We will continue to live in this town. We will continue to do those things that make this city what I thought was a very special place. I will trust that the activism, and I will trust that the work that we've done in the past year is enough to build some capacity, to build some ways to continue to express one's hurt, anger, disappointment, frustration, and yet still be able to live in this town.
You know, Anthony, I can really hear the pain in your voice, and I guess it's really hard at a time like this to sort of think of the bigger picture. But what will, in your view, the potential fallout from this verdict be politically, societally? What happens now?
Sometimes you need some very shocking images to pull people out of their complacency. Sometimes you need some very strong medicine, metaphorically speaking. Maybe this will wake up some people who are still feel that everything is okay. And then we can start having those kinds of discussions, and we can start having some really in-depth kinds of things. Sometimes there's opportunities in crisis. As a man of faith, I have to believe that everything is in order. As a man of faith, you believe that God knows what's going on. As a person who's caught in their own humanity, it's sometimes hard. So I look to my faith to try to sustain me while I try to figure out what's going to happen here.
Anthony Kennedy from Kenosha City Council. For weeks now, thousands of migrants, mainly from the Middle East, have been trying to cross into the European Union at the border between Poland and Belarus. The EU has accused the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, of masterminding this in retaliation at EU-imposed sanctions. Now he's given a defiant interview to our Russia correspondent Steve Rosenberg, in which he denied inviting migrants to Belarus.
It was a rare meeting with the man who's long been labelled Europe's last dictator. The West says Alexander Lukashenko is using migrants as a political weapon. Today, we confronted him with reports his soldiers have been cutting through border fences to help migrants into the EU.
Our guys are helping the migrants get into the Polish territory. It's perfectly possible. I think that's absolutely possible. Maybe someone helped them. I won't even look into this.
Thousands of migrants have been coming to Belarus to try to slip into Europe. Alexander Lukashenko denies bringing them here, but he warned the EU 6 months ago.
I told the EU I'm not going to detain migrants on the border, hold them at the border, and if they keep coming from now on, I still won't stop them, because they're not coming to my country, they're going to yours. The West stopped talking to us and working with us. If you don't want to, then fine. We'll sort this problem out ourselves, as best we can.
Mr. Lukashenko is a pariah in the West, accused of stealing the presidency and of a brutal crackdown on his opponents. Human rights groups say there are more than 800 political prisoners now in Belarus. Mr. Lukashenko offered a different figure, 0. Since July, I told him, 270 NGOs have been shut down in Belarus. Mr. Lukashenko was unrepentant.
I'll answer your question with no bother. We'll massacre all the scum that you, the West, have been financing. Oh, You're upset that we've destroyed all your structures, your NGOs, and all those that you've been paying for.
We saw protesters being beaten, and we saw young people coming out of detention centres with injuries on their bodies.
Okay, I admit it.
You admit it?
People were beaten at the Akrestina detention centre, but there were police beaten up too, and you didn't show this.
Alexander Lukashenko may be using the migrant crisis to try to force the EU to talk to him, to recognise him as the president of Belarus. But there is no sign the West is ready to do that.
Steve Rosenberg. South Africa's state-owned power provider Eskom says it has for the first time found clear evidence of sabotage at a power plant. This comes as the country is struggling with frequent power cuts blamed on years of bad management and alleged corruption. Our Africa correspondent Andrew Harding reports from Johannesburg.
8 thick steel rods were cut at a coal-fired power plant south of Johannesburg, bringing down a pylon and briefly disrupting electricity supplies. It's not the first time this kind of sabotage has been suspected, but the man in charge of South Africa's struggling power utility, Andre de Ruyter, said there was now no doubt.
So the stays were cut, the tower was pushed over, but nothing was stolen. So this is not an economic crime. This was clearly now an act of sabotage, and I think we can call it as such.
But who would do such a thing? For years, South Africans have endured frequent power cuts, blamed on chronic mismanagement and corruption in the energy sector. But hard evidence of sabotage now takes this crisis to a whole new level. The suspicion is that corrupt officials linked to a faction in the governing ANC are to blame. They want to undermine attempts to clean up the industry, and so they sabotage the power grid to make the government look weak. There is a pattern here. Earlier this year, supporters of South Africa's disgraced former President Jacob Zuma went on the rampage, destroying vital infrastructure. The feuding within the ANC is becoming more violent, causing huge economic damage, and looking more and more like treason.
Andrew Harding. Coming up, Wikipedia's language barrier to getting the truth about global warming.
While the English version has 40,000 plus active editors, more than 150 of these languages, you have less than 10 people editing content in their own language.
The Prime Minister of Eswatini, the southern African country formerly known as Swaziland, has admitted to the BBC that police fired on civilians during deadly protests that have rocked the kingdom this year. Earlier this month, Human Rights Watch and the UN released reports stating security forces used live ammunition and engaged in disproportionate and unnecessary use of force in protests against the country's autocratic ruler, King Mswati III, and that no member of the security forces had been held accountable. Nomsa Maseko reports from Eswatini's capital, Mbabane.
Eswatini, Africa's last absolute monarchy, has experienced some of the most violent protests the country has ever seen. Pro-democracy protests by healthcare workers, students and civil servants fled up in June, leading the government to deploy the army. But the protests have been met with resistance. At least 40 people have been killed. The violent demonstrations left many more injured, plunging the already overwhelmed healthcare system into deeper crisis.
Small boys were shot. Some of them are amputated. And to see a small boy, 15-year-old boy, being shot by state military or state police, whosoever did it, it brings emotions to me.
Sandi Lemota is a nurse at Mbabane Hospital.
Who gave the order to shoot to kill? Why kill?
Prime Minister Cleopas Dlamini says it's not just the police who are to blame.
Nobody knows whether everybody who died was killed by the police. There was a lot of looting, so people were protecting their properties, and in that process they were shooting back. So I'm not saying the police didn't kill anyone, but I'm saying not everybody who died was killed by the police.
King Mswati, who is often accused of consistently ignoring calls for meaningful reforms, has agreed to a dialogue to find solutions to the intensifying protests. Prime Minister Cleopas Dlamini again.
The economic demands, yes, they are legitimate. Some of them are legitimate, but of course they are a result of shortage of resources. So legitimate as they may be, they may not be immediately responded to the satisfaction of the people that are raising them.
The dialogue is expected to start in 3 months' time. Until then, the Prime Minister hopes there won't be a flare-up of protests.
The people will tell us when we get to the dialogue whether they want multipartyism or not. I will not be surprised if they come back and say, no, we like the current system. We don't know how much following is behind these people we are talking about. We doubt very much that they command a majority, although they are very vocal.
Some have questioned the legitimacy of the demonstrations which descended into rioting, looting and destruction of property.
First of all, it's very regrettable that we ended up with people dying. And it was also a window into how we are not this country that is used to having violent marches. We've always had peaceful marches. We were all in shock, and I think we still are.
Joy Ndwandwe is a researcher on indigenous knowledge. She believes cool heads must prevail to allow for successful discussions.
It will take humility on both sides. You see, at the moment, we are all pointing fingers. Everybody is saying it's the king.
When you hear children saying, "Akahambe Mswati," the king must go, and that is part of what is celebrated by the pro-democracy proponents, is that it's already saying we actually have no patience to negotiate. He must go. That is not what is going to take us into an inclusive and fair dialogue. We need to get that narrative out.
There's an uneasy calm in the small kingdom, but tensions are simmering below the surface, with many saying it's only a matter of time before protests start again.
That report from Nomsa Maseko. The Democratic Republic of Congo is an African country that is rich in mineral wealth, but where nearly 3/4 of the population live on less than $2 a day. It's also one of the most corrupt countries in Africa. Joseph Kabila was president from 2001 to 2019, and companies owned by his family and friends now stand accused of funneling millions of dollars of public funds through their bank accounts while he was in office. A BBC investigative unit, Africa Eye, has seen the evidence, which is contained in Africa's biggest ever data leak, as has the French investigative journal Mediapart. Julian Marshall heard more from Mediapart's Jan Philippine.
One of the most striking discoveries is that this has been performed with the help of a bank. This bank is a Gabonese bank called BGFI, which has a branch in the DRC. The general manager of this bank was the own adoptive brother of, at the time, President Kabila. His name is Francis Selemani. And that's how this state money has been diverted, because the BGFI had among its clients a large variety of public institutions like the Central Bank, the Electoral Commission, the National State Mining Company, GECAMINS. So all these public institutions had bank accounts at BGFI. And so it's because you had on one side the President Kabila, who had authorities on these state-owned companies, and this bank in which these companies had bank accounts, that this huge diversion of state money could happen. The other family member involved is one of Joseph Kabila's sisters, Mrs. Gloria Mteyu. She is doubly involved because she was both a 40% shareholder of the same branch of the BGFI in the DRC, and she also owned 20% of the shadow company Sud Oil that received most of this state money.
You say that this happened when President Kabila was in office. Is there any evidence to suggest that he was aware of what was happening?
He denies that anything wrong has been committed by the institution of the presidency of the Republic, and which is technically correct. But what our investigation shows is not an involvement of the presidency of the Republic, but a direct involvement of Mr. Kabila himself and his family, which is slightly different.
What about the others who have been specifically named?
Yes, we approached all the persons involved for comment. We insisted very much. We tried several times to obtain their comments. And what is also striking in this investigation is that we had in front of us a wall of silence. The bank didn't answer, his family members did not answer, and also the presidents of the public institutions that gave that public money to the Kabila family. And we're talking about the Central Bank of Congo, about the state mining company Gécamine, the National Independent Electoral Commission, the state agency that is building the roads for the DRC. So all these public institutions, among them, none of them answered.
Jan Philippine of the journal Mediapart. BBC Africa Eye's investigation will be available online to watch from the 29th of November. A study of non-English language Wikipedia pages, including some in Swahili, Kazakh and Belarusian, has found a number are promoting conspiracy theories and misinformation about climate change. Scientists overwhelmingly agree global warming is caused by humans. However, the climate change entry in Chinese, for example, lists solar activity as a possible explanation for the world's average temperature being on the rise. I spoke to our climate change disinformation specialist Marco Silva and asked him for some more examples.
One of the key misleading points that I came across involved a number of pages saying that scientists are divided over the causes of global warming today. I mean, 99.9% of scientific literature looking into the causes of global warming today says it's man-made. There's no doubt about that. And still, in some of these pages, you'd have sentences suggesting that, well, the scientific community is divided. Some people say this, some people say that. And that, of course, when it comes up side by side with other bits of science that are actually fact-based, is quite dangerous, because these claims are then lent this mantle of credibility, as it were. So that's one of the key points I came across. Another could be on Croatian Wikipedia, on Bosnian Wikipedia, the main pages on climate change. About more than 1/3 of each one of these pages was entirely devoted to either questioning the science of climate change, but also pushing quite subtly conspiratorial views.
Wikipedia is really important to a lot of people. People use it all over the world for all sorts of different reasons. But so how easy is it to put false information on Wikipedia, and how easy is it for that to stay up there for a long time?
I think you mentioned a really important point. People might not think it is an important website. It's still today one of the top 15 websites in the world that generates the most traffic. So it is a huge focus of attention. Now, often when people think of Wikipedia, they might think of Wikipedia as a singular, unique entity. But actually, within Wikipedia, you have 300 plus versions of Wikipedia, each one in 300 plus different languages. Each one of these versions relies entirely on the efforts of volunteers to publish content, to edit the content. So while the English version, which is by far the most popular, has 40,000 plus active editors every month, on more than 150 of these languages, you have less than 10 people every month editing content in their own language. And this alone exposes what the problem is, in the opinion of the Wikimedia Foundation. This is a problem about not having enough volunteers, not having enough people just editing and putting content out, keeping an eye on any misleading content and misinformation.
Our climate change disinformation specialist, Marco Silva. Spiritual guides, or peers, are deeply embedded in the culture of Pakistan, including in its politics. But recently, the Prime Minister, Imran Khan, was criticised for using them. Asif Faruqi of BBC Urdu spoke to the BBC's Farnak Amidi about their importance.
If you go to the history of a peer in these regions, it is a very, very long history, which dates back to after Prophet Muhammad. He did not come to South Asia himself to preach Islam, but the people who came to this region to spread Islam, Sufis. And these peers are their followers.
And how popular are the peers right now in today's society?
Very popular. If you ask me, they are getting more and more popular every day. People living in the rural areas, they don't have money or resources to get medical treatment, for example. So they will go to these peers with their illnesses, and the peers will recite something from Quran and write some verse of Quran on the paper and tell them, go home and you will be fine. And also there are issues of joblessness, several problems they have. So they go more and more towards those peers to seek their help and guidance to solve their problems.
Very similar to some parts of Iran as well. There are shrines that people go to, which they believe that there are people who are descendants of Muhammad, the Prophet, and they go there to heal certain illnesses. There are shrines that single women go to find husbands. So it's quite similar.
Exactly. That's really a very good example. Similarly, there are shrines in Pakistan.
Asif, tell us about them infiltrating politics.
I don't remember in any prime minister in the last 50 years who has not been a follower of one or more than one peers. Bhuttos, Sharifs, even our present Prime Minister Imran Khan. For example, Benazir Bhutto used to go to a peer in Ladkana, her hometown, and then her husband, who then became the president of Pakistan, he actually brought his peer with him to the president house, and he used to live at the president palace to help him and guide him on day-to-day affairs. Similarly, Nawaz Sharif, he used to go to a peer who would hit him with a stick so that he becomes successful. Imran Khan, his story is that during the election campaign, he used to visit a shrine in Punjab. This woman, she was Imran Khan's spiritual guide to some extent. Whether she's a peer or not, I can't say for sure. But she obviously is a woman of faith. She belongs to a family which has a history of Sufism and all that. And they ended up marrying just before the election. And it became a huge story recently that Imran Khan was seeking spiritual guidance from this woman who's his wife on affairs of state. There's obviously no way of confirming it, and it could be just be allegation or rumor. And some of the opposition leaders actually have accusing Imran Khan of not working in the principles of governance, but rather following spiritual guidance in very, very crucial decision making.
Asif Faruqi. And that's all from us for now, but there will be a new edition of the Global News podcast later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. That's what Hannah Nani Attar did. She got in touch from just outside Munich in Germany in response to a report about how grandmothers' brains are actually hardwired to love their grandchildren even more than their own children.
Mama, my mother's mom, used to tell me when I was growing up, now don't you do anything that you wouldn't do in front of me. Well, all right. Those words haunt me even today if I'm ever thinking of doing something like finishing an entire bag of Haribo or whatnot. At the time when I was growing up in Houston, I attended a rather conservative school where there were a number of nuns, and they would say things to us to discourage misbehaving, as young girls might do. Yet it's those words of my grandmother, of my mama, that still haunt me today and have turned me hopefully into the civic-minded and socially responsible individual that I am. Now, even though she had a reputation of being tough as nails, she also, on occasion, opened up her softer side and made evidently clear to her children, her grandchildren, and even her great-grandchildren. Just what a kindred soul she actually was.
Please keep your grandma memories coming. This podcast was produced by Marion Strawn. The studio manager was David Evans. The editor is Karen Martin. I'm Jonathan Savage. Until next time, goodbye.